Hi everybody, good afternoon. Welcome to the session Country Case Studies on Basic Income. This is Minseo from University of Wisconsin-Madison, Department of Sociology. I'm truly glad to chair this session because given that the overarching theme of this year's BN Congress is basic income in reality, I truly believe that all of our three presentations, each of which deals with the concrete experience of Catalonia, South Korea, and Brazil, will provide precious insights for all of us. For time for possible comments and questions, Q&As, I ask each of our presenters to keep your presentation like in 15 minutes, if possible. And our first presentation today is entitled "The Design Methodology of the Pilot Project Itself," given by Aida, Martinez, Tinaut from Catalonia government. Without further ado, please welcome Aida to the floor. Aida, it's all yours.
So, hello everyone. I'm Aida Martinez Tinaut. I come from the office of the pilot project to implement the UBI in Catalonia from the Catalan government. And I wanted to participate in this concurrent session because I felt like it was important to show you about the methodology and the specific design of the Catalan project, because we have been working very hard to try to make it a real pilot in the sense of trying it to prove the effects of a truly unconditional and quasi-universal cash transfer. So, this is not sending. Yeah, but. So I'm going to expand a little bit on what I talked on Thursday, sorry. I'm talking about the Spanish and Catalan context. What does the UBI solve in the current conditional systems that we live in? And what we already know on the UBI effects, very summarized, obviously, but I'm going to focus on what we don't know, because it's what we have been focusing on when we were planning on the design of the UBI experiment in Catalonia. And lastly, I will talk about the interest outcomes, the design, and the evaluation of the Catan project. So very briefly, because I already explained that on Thursday, the context in Catalonia, it's a context where, as given that it's not the poorest region in Spain, it's one of the richest regions in Spain. It still has a 20% chronic amount of population living under the poverty threshold, and the conditional benefit system, it's inefficient when we talk about the coverage, because, for example, the biggest benefit system that we have in Catalonia, it's called the RGC. It covers only 42% of households who suffer severe poverty. So that's one thing. And another thing is the very low amount of money that the people that participate in these programs are given. So, for example, in Catalonia, it's almost 1,000 euros a month to live above the poverty threshold. But if you manage to get the RGC, which we know that not everybody is able to get it, you only get 717 euros per month. That's for one single adult living in a household. So there are some things that should be done in our system to change it, and one of these things could be the basic income, and we want to explore it through a pilot to both try to see some of the evidence that we don't have yet, and also to put the debate on the streets, as so many speakers said in past discussions. So as I said, there's a 20% of chronicity of poverty in Catalan population. It has been like that since 2004 and before, and it happens after all social transfers. So when we think about the context, not only thinking about the poverty threshold, but also the people who are deprived in Catalonia, so people living under severe material deprivation, or people living under severe material and social deprivation, the numbers are similar in the sense that the trend goes the same. It maintains itself and it also increases since 2013. When we look at Catalan numbers compared to Spanish numbers and European EU 27 numbers, we can see that Catalonia, as I told you, it's a little bit better off than Spain, but we cannot be congratulating ourselves because we're still are 3 percentage points above the EU 27 when we're talking about poverty rates, and also the trend looks very stagnant. So we don't have a realistic feeling that things will be changing in the near future if nothing else changes. Also, when we think about the trend in perspective of severe material deprivation, we see that the EU 27 has decreased its rate, but it hasn't happened like that in Spain or in Catalonia. So when we see the context, we can see what basic income could do in order to improve our conditional benefit system. So it avoids over-specification of conditional benefits, because as we know, the more conditions you put on a program, the less coverage it has. It also avoids stigmatization. So as you know, sometimes people meeting the criteria for applying to a program, they don't even apply for fear of being stigmatized in society. And also there's the poverty trap. So the incompatibility of many benefits with work income makes people not having a good enough incentive to enter the job market, and that leaves them in a chronic situation of poverty. Also, the non-take-up, there's a 40 to 60% average of minimum incomes in the European Union that are not applied. And the reasons are various. It can be lack of information, language barrier, digital barrier, and so on and so on. And what we see is that we have a benefit system that it's conditional because it's said to be the most efficient way of allocating money. But what we are actually seeing in our systems, in our societies, or at least in the Catalan one, is that it's not actually effective or efficient. So what we know about UBI effects in different outcome topics is quite a lot, but there are some things that we don't know yet. And when we were first designing the pilot project, we wanted to focus on what we don't know, because we didn't believe that it made that much sense to focus on UBI effects that we already know, but we wanted to take what happens in Catalonia or in the Catalan context. So instead, we wanted to allocate the public budget for this project to know more about outcomes that have lack of evidence or very little empirical evidence. So that would be, for example, gender and intra-household relationships. And now I'm going to tell you more about how we're going to explore about these outcomes. Also, what happens with investment, savings, and debt, improved autonomy and real freedom. We are very interested also what happens when participants of a pilot project on UBI think about and what attitudes do they have towards the welfare state. Do they become better attitudes or worse, or we wanted to know that. And we want to know about spillover and general equilibrium effects and aggregate demand for social services. We were thinking specifically on health services, educational services, and social services. So taking all into account, we came up with a design. So I'm going to give a little bit more detail of why and how we came up with these items of design. So the amount, we wanted it to be very, really basic to cover the basic material needs. So that's why we put it around the poverty threshold in Spain. So for adults, the amount of money given on the pilot would be 800 euros a month, and for minors would be 300 euros a month. The target population, we wanted our pilot to be not targeted, so to be truly universal. And what we did, it's actually quasi-universal because we're excluding the 10% highest incomes in society. But the only reason we exclude them, it's because we wanted to simulate a progressive tax reform that Catalan government believes should be preceding an eventual public policy on UBI. So the length would be 2 years, so we can understand outcomes, and we have enough time to see some of them. And the sample would be one of the biggest that has been designed in Europe, so 5,000 people receiving the UBI. The reason about having like a threshold design for our pilot is basically that we didn't want to leave any outcomes behind. We were interested in universal like community and aggregate outcomes, and we were also interested in individual outcomes. So if we chose to focus only on the aggregate and community outcomes, we could have chosen just to do a saturation study like Madhya Pradesh, and that would be it. But the thing is that if we did that, what we couldn't have said with the results is something about Catalonia. We would have only be able to say something about the locations and municipalities that were participating in the saturation studies. So that's why, given the fact that we have a big sample and a big enough sample, we wanted to separate it into 2 different designs. So the RCT will serve us to know more about, to be able to say things about what would a UBI look like in Catalonia for the Catalan territory. And the saturation study would be able to tell us more about aggregate and equilibrium effects with a UBI in different municipalities. So another innovative way of thinking about the design of the pilot is, as I said, there's not a lot of empirical evidence on intra-household effects, and we were very interested in that from a gender perspective, obviously. And that's why the randomization unit for the RCT is not going to be the individual, which is the typical case in a lot of pilots, but so it's going to be the household. So we're going to randomize approximately 1,000 households in Catalonia, and everyone registered on them will be receiving the UBI. So that way we can see individual effects and also what happens within the household. And if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. I'm going to focus a little bit more on a very innovative part of the methodology that we're using. So this is specifically how we're going to control the saturation study. So what we found out, this took us many months to prepare. What we found out is that when you have a lot of units, in our case, a lot of municipalities, there's 947 municipalities in Catalonia. If you only get 2 or 3 treatment units, you will get not enough statistical significance to be able to put a control group. So what we thought was, okay, we don't want to gain statistical power by increasing the amount of units being treated, because if that happens, the towns would be smaller, so they may not have schools or they may not have health centers, so we wouldn't be able to see many outcomes that we were very interested in knowing more about. So that's why we said, okay, we're going to focus on 2 municipalities. Why 2 and not 1? Because we were afraid of having any shock if we chose just 1 municipality. A shock may happen, like, I don't know, a big business opening there, or I don't know, a lot of people winning the lottery, or so on and so on. So we didn't want to risk it, so that's why we chose 2 different municipalities to take care of that. So for those of you who are not familiar with synthetic control methodology, what it does is it creates a synthetic version of treated units by weighting different variables and observations. So how do we do that? We have to, I think the most difficult part of implementing this methodology to have a control for a treatment group that it's very small compared to the amount of units existing is that you have to have a lot of registered data. So you have to choose like 3, 4, 5 different outcomes where you have register data, administrative data for all municipalities or all the units being treated and not treated, so all of them. So you can have like a parallel strand theorem, but with a difference of time, like as you can see this dotted line, it's like before and after. So what we wanted to see is that before this dotted line, so before COVID, because as you know, COVID may distort many variables and many data. So we wanted to make sure that before COVID, the treated population, the synthetic control population, and the entire population of Catalonia were following the same trend. If that was the case, it would mean that they would be good controls. We are going to keep testing on it during the pilot if we get the budget to implement it. And yeah, that's a really innovative methodology in the sense that it gives us the opportunity to be controlling only 2 municipalities without being restricted to choose a certain municipality. So for example, in our case, our synthetic control municipality, let's call it like that, would be our synthetic control municipality, let's call it like that, would be formed by parts, let's call it, of 5 to 6 other municipalities. So maybe we get the health outcome of one of 2 municipalities, but not the educational outcome of those 2 municipalities because it doesn't follow the trend, if that makes sense. If you want more information about this specific methodology, I can send you information, or we can follow on the question. And I'm afraid I don't have time, but if I can have like 30 seconds. So another important thing about the way we designed the pilot project in Catalonia is that we never meant to design it by ourselves. We had 2 different ways of thinking about the pilot. One of them was that we wanted to evaluate it. It may sound basic and obvious, but it's clearly not, given the fact that we've seen so many other cases not being that the case. So since the beginning, before starting to design the pilot, we worked with the Catalan Institute for Public Policy Evaluation. So the design was initially designed for it to be able to be evaluated. So if that makes sense. And we're using quantitative methodology with support of qualitative methodology. And yeah, I think I will leave it like that and maybe wait for questions because I'm afraid I don't have many time. Thank you for your attention, and you can check for the methodological report on our website. Thank you.
Thank you, Aida. Thank you, Aida, for the great presentation. It was really impressive that the pilot carefully reviewed other similar conventionally existing pilots and tried to identify what is unknown. And our next presentation is by Hyun Shin from Basic Income Jeonbuk Network in Korea. The presentation is entitled, "Is a Sustainable Basic Income Possible? A Comparative Analysis of Sustainability of 3 Pilots Related to Rural Areas in Korea." So, Hyun is Oliver.
Hello, everyone. Yeah, I'm from Jeonbuk province. I'm a baby of basic income, especially in research. But these days, I'm consulting to the politician in this area. So that's why I am here. Many politicians and local council wanted to introduce basic income in my area. So Yeah. Uh, mm, the Jeonbuk, I live in Jeonbuk. Yeah, Jeonbuk has a farmers allowance system. Yeah, it started from 219. Yeah, 2 years ago. Many politicians wanted to introduce the kind of system, but it is very difficult. As you know, to get securing funding is very important, very difficult. Yeah, you said to me, you can say, do you have any deep pocket? Yeah, but deep pocket, without deep pocket, we cannot do. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, Korea has seen a trend of basic income program in the rural areas spreading over the past 5 years. In the 2018 local election, many candidates for local government has presented pledge related to the farmers' allowance, especially rural resident allowance, farmers' basic income, rural basic income, and the similar forms of basic income like programs. Following the trend, many metropolitan governments in Korea have tried to introduce various forms of basic income-like programs, such as farmers' allowance, farmers' basic income, and the rural basic income with different names and support amounts. Jeonbuk, my hometown, farmers and fishermen public allowance, public interest allowance, abbreviated as farmers' allowance, is a form of rural program that pursues basic income project at the level of the metropolitan government. It is first time in Korea, especially in the level of metropolitan government. Following Jeonbuk, so lead many metropolitan government in Korea are competing to pay subsidy to farmers using taxes as a fund under different names such as farmers allowance, farmers basic income, and the rural basic income. In area where targeting only farmers or fishermen is deemed undesirable for sustainable rural area, a rural basic income targeting all regions is being implemented as a pilot project, going beyond the farmers' allowance and the basic income for farmers and the fishermen. This is the Cheongsanmyeon Rural Basic Income Pilot Project. It was introduced in the morning, by the researcher Yoon Hyung-jung in Yeoncheon-gun, Gyeonggi-do. Gyeonggi-do's plan to gradually expand the project if its effectiveness is proven. In 2023, the Chairman's Association of the All Provincial Assemblies in Korea suggested that the government introduce rural basic income nationwide. Yeah, the representative is and the local council, especially Jeonbuk Provincial Assembly, but the kind of suggestion was refused by the government because the money and no political support. If farmers and the fishermen public interest allowance of rural basic income programs were implemented using local government taxes, the Iksan City Sangdangbu Village self-governing pension shows a different approach in that it creates pension through self-generate revenue by a very small scale. Strictly speaking, it is difficult to classify non-basic income pilot project as a pilot project, but considering the possibility that ongoing projects similar to basic income or pension projects may change over time. It is not easy for local government to review the abolition of basic income related allowances, which began to be paid as a flood in rural area. Will residents who have received basic income beneficiaries readily agree to end the benefit? It's a problem. Yeah, it is meaningful to review the status of rural basic income and similar programs that are spreading in Korea and examine how much sustainable attributes these programs have and how residents perceive the various basic income projects. The criteria for selecting Korean rural basic income and similar programs are as follows. Firstly, the rural basic income pilot project. It was introduced by the Yoon Hyung-jung in the morning. Secondly, the Farmers Allowance Project, my hometown. Yeah, thirdly, the village self-governing pension. Yeah, Sangdang-pok village in Iksan City, which generates revenue through village communities, regardless of local government tax support. No tax. This analysis will primarily examine several recent cases. Yeah, and as you know, in nationwide, there are many examples of basic income pilot being discontinued or terminated as follows. Yeah, Ontario basic income pilot Canada cancelled by the by new government, and Finland's basic income trial not extended, and Stockton basic income pilot was end of because end of pilot project. Yeah. So there is no not sustainable basic income in the world. So I'd like to introduce challenging categories task for certain sustainabilities. Yeah. Many discussion, many professors and researchers discuss the kind of challenging categories. Yeah, I will classify 6 categories. It can be classified as indicators. Yeah, the first one is funding. Yeah, Professor Paredes proposed the basic income funded via tax on natural resources as a sustainable source of funding for the program. It's very important. No tax, no basic income in the world. Yeah, these days. Political support is very important. Guy Standing argued that a basic income is affordable, but it requires political will and the safety in the way we think about social protection. Yeah, in Korea, Songnam City will abolish use allowance from next year because the major party abolished the ordinance in this year. Yeah, it's the very, very sad thing. Yeah, the performance third, performance evaluation. Evaluation is very important. Yeah, as you heard, just before the Catalonian case, yeah, the evaluation is very important. After evaluate the effectiveness, they will extend or not. Yeah, in this case, yeah, performance evaluation can get more money or not. Third, community engagement. In this case, in Korean case, it is not important. Only funding, political support, and the evaluation is more important. But also community engagement, collaboration, administration is also important. Many, especially Cheongsan Rural Basic Income Project gets a good administration system. Yeah. I'd like to introduce 3 finance characteristics. Yeah. As you see this table, yeah, rural basic income, which is sustainability is very weak, but 2 other project is sustainable. Yeah, not a pilot, can be a continuous project, and the self-governing pension as long as revenue is generated sustainable. Yeah, I classified and analyzed the task and categories, three pilot, yeah, like this. And you can see my paper in the homepage. Yeah, Hungary's homepage. You can find in detail there. Yeah. So I summarize like this. Yeah, funding, political support, performance evaluation, community engagement, collaboration, administration. In this respect, Cheongshan rural basic basic income is very successful. Without if they can extend and secure more money, yeah. And the farmers' allowance and the village self-governing pensions is very weak. But yeah, in this respect, very weak. Yeah, but the funding is very nice. Yeah, yeah, funding successful. In this respect, farmers' allowance and the village self-governing pension can be sustainable. Yeah, and so I surveyed, surveyed this area. Yeah, surveyed. Yeah, survey sample is Cheongshanmyeon 100 people, comparison area, non-beneficiary area, 143 and 63. Yeah, adjacent area and non-adjacent area, 전라북도 800 people. The survey result is like this. Yeah. The basic income perception is very low in my hometown area. And but the basic income perception was 67.42 point in adjacent area, but the rural basic income perception was 63.11 point in adjacent area, and 40.27 in my hometown area. And the funding problem and political support is like this. Yeah, funding problem is very important. Do you think that the current rural basic income will continue to be paid to even after the pilot project? Not high. Yeah, Cheongshanmyeon people, yeah, will expect, yeah, not high. Yeah. Can and the political support, yeah, political support. Do you think the rural basic income pilot project is receiving support from all walks of life, or from residents of the other area who do not receive benefit? Yeah, it's very relatively low. Yeah, and Cheongshanmyeon wanted to get more population from this experiment. Yeah. So, do you think that residents of non-beneficiary area will also demand the same benefit if they learn about the rural basic income fighter project in Cheongshanmyeon? Yeah, it's very high. Yeah, nationwide it's very high. But the performance evaluation is not high, very low. Yeah, performance evaluation very low. Yeah. This of the red letter you can see is very low. Yeah. Do you think that a rural basic income can be expanded and paid to all provinces in Korea? No. Especially the pilot area. Do you think that the population of Cheongshanmyeon is increasing due to the rural basic income pilot project? Yes, only in that area. But the adjacent area and the non-adjacent area, whole people, yeah, that kind of will is not high. Do you have any plan to move to an area where you can receive the money benefit of rural basic income payment? No. Yeah, but the Cheongsanmyeon wanted to get more population from this pilot. Yeah, maybe Gyeonggi-do will evaluate the kind of the system, yeah. But after 4 years, yeah. So I would like to conclude, yeah. From the perspective of the characteristic of sustainability or basic income, rural basic income needed to supplement its sustainability is very weak. Yeah, farmers' allowance is to supplement the basic income characteristics through areas, through cases aimed at farmers' basic income, rural basic income. Village self-governing pension need a strategy to supplement the categorical type with the universal type. From the perspective of the challenging categories, tasks for making basic income sustainable, Cheongsanmyeon rural basic income need to supplement securing funding. Jeonbuk farmers' allowance need to strengthen, conducting rigorous evaluation and supplement collaborating with other pilot projects because that kind of a project has no evaluation system. 성당포구 village self-governing pension needs to overcome the limitation in conducting rigorous performance evaluation in collaborations with other pension pilot using ordinance. No ordinance there, only a kind of contract. Yeah. From the perspective, perception surveys of beneficiaries, adjacent and non-adjacent resident, there is high expectation that a project will continue even after pilot completion. That's why we wanted to be the pilot sustainable. High level of demand from residents of a non-beneficiary area. As the level of political support will practically increase, more acceptance and consensus among members of society will be required to secure funding. Thank you.
Thank you, Hyun, for the great presentation on the comprehensive review of the necessities and challenges lying ahead of basic income pilots, along with the analysis of the survey data on the perceptions of the residents of the local area. Our next presenter is Jurgen Bispelere from University of Freiburg.
Just like this, okay. Oh, perfect. Okay, sorry, let me just move that around a bit. I'm a bit taller. Okay, thanks very much, everyone, for joining us here at the post-lunch session. So this is a paper with 3 authors. So myself from Freiburg, Leticia Morales, who's sitting there from Universidad Austral de Chile, and then we have a missing author who actually is the expert on Brazil, unfortunately, Fabio Waltenberg from Universidade Federal Fluminense. Fabio couldn't make it to this conference. This is a paper that's actually going to appear in a couple of months in a special issue of the International Social Security Review. So there's going to be a special issue on emergency basic income with a lot of really, really interesting papers. But this is the most interesting paper. So in a sense, you've had it all already, you know. No, seriously, you should check it out. If emergency basic income is of interest, this will be a thing to watch for. Okay, so in a nutshell, briefly, what we want to do is, so Letty and I have worked on emergency basic income. We've written like a few small papers thinking about a sort of effectiveness argument around it. And then we had this idea of a sort of different model, different ways in which we can think about emergency basic income and universal basic income, how they relate to each other. And then we realized, actually, as I was already doing some work with Fabio on Marika, we realized that Marika is actually really, really interesting case study. So the collaboration here basically is bringing in some thinking around emergency basic income and then using Marika as a case to sort of illustrate what we think is the best way to go about. So in a nutshell, I'll say something very briefly about the pandemic policy response. We'll introduce the case a little bit, and then I want to move quite fast to what we think is the main reasons or the main advantages of one model, which we call the dial-up, dial-down model over the switch-on, switch-off model. Okay, so if we think about, I mean, during the pandemic, of course, there was a lot of talk around basic income, right? So two sort of separate debates. One was around effectiveness. So a lot of people were trying to make the case that in the context of an emergency, pandemic, but possible other emergencies as well, something like a basic income would be a really, really good idea. And, you know, we've written our own papers on this. We think that's true. We think, and, you know, it's something like, you know, an unconditional individual universal type of system is going to be able to respond much, much faster and in many, many sort of interesting ways compared to all the other type of targeted programs people have been putting forward. A second debate then is around political feasibility. So a lot of people also argue that something like the pandemic crisis is going to boost the debate around basic income. I've done some work on that as well. I'm a lot more skeptical about that. In a nutshell, basically, you know, pandemics are temporary crises. And so, you know, during the crisis, yes, you have a lot of boost. But afterwards, as things normalize, the debates themselves also go down. But that's a separate paper. Anyone interested, we can share these different papers with you. But it raises a really, really interesting question, because both the effectiveness debate and the political feasibility debate tell us a lot about the emergency basic income. But the question is, what does it tell us about the normal, unconditional, the more permanent version, so to speak? So emergency basic income by definition is temporary. So it's like a basic income, but it's temporary. And the regular basic income, of course, is permanent. So the question is, how do these two relate to each other? I think within the basic income debate, we've had two competing views. The first one is to think that emergency basic income is a competitor to universal basic income. And these are the people who basically say, look, we really shouldn't pay too much attention to emergency basic income. That's just a distraction. Universal basic income, the full version, that's where everything's at. All this temporary stuff is just going to confuse us. It's going to compete, you know, organizational resources, budget resources, political competition. It's a distraction. A second view, opposing view, is to think that emergency basic income is like a stepping stone. Once we have the emergency basic income, that's going to help us expand into the full permanent type of version. Unfortunately, that kind of runs then into the problem that the temporary nature of crisis means that this particular link is not going to happen. So in the debate, we have these two wrong views. What we're actually trying to argue is that there is a third view, which is actually to see emergency basic income and universal basic income, so temporary and permanent, as co-evolving and mutually supportive type of systems. So instead of thinking of one rather than the other in a type of sequence or competition, we think it could actually really be interesting to look at them together, to really think of them as two systems that can mutually reinforce each other in the sort of ways that generates interesting kind of policy effects, but also interesting political effects, actually boosts the sort of implementation of this all. So actually, these are old slides. I'm going to just forward to show you the model and then going to backtrack and show you the case. So these are the two models that we want to show. So these are two different ways in which you can sort of think of how an emergency basic income features if we have multiple crises. This is an important condition. What we're talking about here is this idea of pandemic preparedness, if you like. It's actually the idea that in some sense, COVID is just one crisis out of many more to come, right? A lot of epidemiologists will tell you that purely on the pandemic front, we can actually expect much more of this stuff coming, right? And if that's true, then actually we should really be prepared for this. We need to think about the future. But then in addition to pandemic, of course, we have other types of crises. I mean, climate crises have featured prominently in this conference already, and it's something that we're all very, very aware about, right? So we can think about multiple crises and think of that as, in a sense, how do we prepare for this going forward? So one model, switch on, switch off. So think of it literally as switching on, switch off your electricity or your radio, right? So during a crisis, we switch it on. The moment the crisis disappears, we switch it off, fully off. We wait, next crisis, switch it on again, switch it off, and so on and so forth. So that's going from standby to activating. Then we have a dial-up, dial-down model, very, very different. Dial-up, dial-down is like having your radio, having the music on very low level, and the moment people come into the room, you dial it up. You make sure that it's proper noise, so to speak. The difference here is then we're talking about activating to upgrading, and what we're actually upgrading is this underlying universal basic income, which gets upgraded by temporary basic income additions, if you like, every time we have a crisis. So during switch on, switch off, it's just temporary things, nothing, temporary, nothing, temporary, nothing, and so on and so forth. With the dial-up, dial-down model, we have a very low-level basic income operating all the time. During a crisis, we upgrade it. We basically put more money into the system, effectively. So the cases. Turns out that Maricá and Niterói, a neighboring city in municipality in Brazil, turns out that they're really, really interesting cases. There's a lot to be said about Maricá and Niterói, like really, really a lot. But I'm going to run you through this in 2 minutes, literally, okay? Just some of the basics. But they're very, very, I just want to say they're very, very fascinating cases. And if you're interested in this, I mean, there's a lot of work being done, but already has been published. And actually, there's a couple of people here from Brazil who can tell you all about this, right? So Eduardo's here. Leandro actually knows really the inside out of this whole thing. So one of the things that's happening, I mean, in Maricá, they talk a lot about solidarity economy. So solidarity economy is actually a whole approach and is a series of policies, if you like. But within that, one of the really important one is the Renda Básica da Cidadania. So the citizens' basic income, if you like. So from 2019, that exists in its current shape. It was at a value of 130 reais, which is actually substantial, family of 4, 25% per capita. It's not universal. This is a means-tested program, right? But it covers 20 to 25% of the population. So not universal, but very, very substantial, right? These are people who are registered in something called Cadastro Único, which is a federally maintained setup registry for people who meet certain, low income kind of conditions, if you like, right? So individually calculated, but a family card payment. Very, very interestingly, it's a payment in a local currency, Mombuca, which is backed by a local community bank, the Banco Mombuca, and which maintains a parity of the national currency, real, with the local currency, the Mombuca. So people receiving this money can only spend it within Maricá, but then the businesses can transfer it back into the national currency and, for example, pay for their resources or whatever, right? So that's in a nutshell. I mean, there's a lot more going on there. In a nutshell, that's how it works. Very importantly, permanent policy, not experiment, not a pilot. This is actual policy. So that by way of background. So what happened during the pandemic? Because that's the bit we're interested. So 2020, Bolsonaro ignores pandemic, municipalities get into action, they initiate public emergency, lockdowns, and support mechanisms. So in the case of Maricá, what that meant is that they instituted something like an emergency basic income supplement, a temporary increase of this basic income from 130 to 300 reais. That's a massive increase, right? That's very, very substantial. Very, very importantly, this happened in the matter of a couple of days, right? So the key feature here is that this happened really, really, really fast. Why? Because there was already a system in place. There was already a system in place. All that was required is for the bank to propose an increase in the payment and for the municipal officials to approve this. Very, very, very fast. Look at the clock here. Ooh, going fast. So just to compare this, we're actually in the paper, we're comparing this with two alternative policies. One is an alternative policy in Marika itself. And the second one is the attempt in a neighboring policy, in a neighboring city of Niteroi, to institute something like a basic income. There's a lot of details in these two cases, but in a nutshell, in both of these alternative policies, the biggest problem was that they had to start from scratch. So they were trying to come up with a support system that had to be implemented from scratch. All of that basically faced serious implementation hurdles. So including things like creating registry databases from scratch, heterogeneous benefit population that had to be checked, that had to be signed up. A lot of the administrators had to spend a lot of time controlling this while they were already under a lot of pressure. I mean, in the midst of a pandemic, it's not the easiest moment to get on with instituting new policy from an administration type of perspective, right? So they had to publicize policies, how this worked. They had to get people on board. They had to get businesses on board in many cases. For example, in Niteroi, they also had to set up a local currency, had the business signing up to this. There were issues about having to figure out how to do the payment. So effectively, you know, having to set up contracts with, you know, with whatever, you know, setting up a card system and so on and so forth. In many of these examples, so in this, for example, the support for workers program, there was payment delays for up to 3 months, according to the evidence provided by Fabio. 3 months, that's a lot for poor population in a context of a pandemic, right? And government officials devoting a significant amount of time to setting up these things. And the same in Niteroi, trying to set up an emergency cash transfer. We see very similar type of issues, right? What are the lessons for this? I have a minute, so I'm going to go very fast now. We think that the main lesson for this illustration, so to speak, in Marika is that we can think about emergency basic income and universal basic income as co-evolving and mutually reinforcing. Why? Because Marika really shows that the renda basica system already being in place makes it really easy to then implement an emergency top-up and bring it back down the moment the crisis features. There's 3 very specific advantages, we think. The first one is purely implementation, agile implementation. So there's joint up, if you like, this joint up political and administrative decision making. It just avoids all these barriers. It makes for very fast and agile policy responses. So that in itself is already really important. But 2 other features worth mentioning. First one is about policy learning. One of the biggest problems with switch on, switch off system is that you lose the policy learning aspect here, right? So you basically have a break. That means that a lot of the people who know, I need 30 seconds more, if that's okay. A lot of people who know how the system works may have moved on or somehow have either shifted, or the responsibility for the crisis itself may have shifted from one implementation department to another, and so on and so forth. Having breaks like that is detrimental for having fast implementation in the middle of a crisis. The dial-up, dial-down model effectively prevents that by having this thing in operation all the time. So much easier on policy learning. And a final point, if we have to have systems in place in the middle of a crisis, it's good to have, in a sense, implementation systems that are workable. But that means we have to invest in them. There's very little incentive in a down time to invest in systems that may or may not be necessary sometime later in the crisis, right? There's always going to be other priorities on budget, on organizational budget, on administration time, and so on and so forth. The dial-up down model has that system in place. So there's a constant need to see that this system is actually workable. So that in itself also provides an added advantage. So in short, we think Marika illustrates very nicely the advantage of a dial-up, dial-down model of combining emergency basic income and universal basic income, and it leads to agile implementation, better policy learning, and upgrading of administration capability over time. And I think that's it. Yep, that's it.
Thank you for the great presentation. I think sharing the experience of emergency basic income seems to be so timely in this era when the coming of the disaster events became a new normal. And that is why the idea that EBI and UBI could co-evolve sounds very promising at the same time. So we are now accepting questions from the floor. When you speak, please specify which presenter you are trying to asking question to. And just one more word on technology. When you speak, please turn on this little black device on your table. When you touch the push words here, it will turn on. Yeah. Any question from the floor?
Yes. I don't have to hold it. Okay. So I have a question for Aida. You talked shortly or briefly about what the evaluation will look like, but I was wondering whether you could elaborate on I know you're more a quantitative oriented scholar, but elaborate on the qualitative part of it. And I'm especially asking because I recently read something about a paper about the Finnish experiment, which hasn't been published anywhere yet, but what they did in Finland, I know Helena Blomberg did this, so they interviewed the participants after the experiment had been done and really talking about their experiences. And that teaches us a lot of valuable lessons, even lessons that can help us contextualize the effects that we find in the pilots. For example, in the Finnish with the Finnish respondents, participants, a lot of them even said that they did not understand at the time of the experiment that the basic income could be, coupled with earnings without, just accumulated with earnings elsewhere. Now that understanding, that lack of understanding, of course, influences their work incentives and their work. So I was wondering whether that is something that you include in the project to see whether all of the participants actually understand fully what's going on in their situation.
Aida. So thank you for the question. Very briefly, what we want to do to evaluate the program, it's on the one hand the quantitative methodology. So we want to focus on administrative data and also on surveys. We will be conducting 3 surveys. One will be a baseline, so before people know if they are in the treatment group or in the control group. One once a year has happened. Another one when the project has happened, 4 surveys. And the last one 6 months after the last payment. So maybe we can see some lasting effects. And about the qualitative methodology, we are planning to do both group discussion and in-depth interviews at least twice during the pilot, and then another round 6 months after the last payment. So especially when I'm talking about group discussions, we want to focus on different subgroups, like maybe health workers for the saturation study, or women in general, maybe very young people, and so on and so on. So we want to know, we want to have randomized groups to know just what do they think, and also subgroup focus groups. And also what we want to do is to ask them not only how has the pilot project affected their lives or their finances and so on, but also how did they find the implementation of the pilot itself, so it can be improved if an hypothetical policy becomes a reality.
Any other questions?
This applied to both the Marika and Catalonia. How did you handle the benefits cliff issue? In other words, were there exemptions made so that people could accumulate the benefits without losing any other programs they were involved in, or how did you confront the issue?
So the design of our pilot project's implementation is that So it's a randomized controlled trial, and the saturation study will cover two entire municipalities. So the amount of people being recipients of conditional benefits will not be so high as the 5,000 people participating in the pilot, but for whoever actually is getting a benefit, what we have designed is that they would stop getting the benefit in order to get the cash transfer of the pilot if they do want it. I mean, if they don't want to participate in the pilot, it's obviously up to them, but we will inform them about everything they need to know in order to participate. And a useful thing I think we did is that we were in a lot of talks with the Social Services Ministry of the Catalan government, which is the one who runs the biggest conditional benefits, so the Renda Garantida de Ciudadanía, so that the participants that participate in the pilot project that used to have this benefit, once the pilot finishes, if they still meet the criteria to actually get it again, they don't have to go through the entire process again, like 4, 5, 6 months, do all the bureaucracy and stuff, like if they didn't have it. We wanted them to have it easier because we don't want any pilot participant to be worse off in any way if we can control for that. So that benefit would be frozen, if that makes sense. So they should just go there and give like a couple documents and it would be automatically activated. So that would be easier for them.
Thank you for your answer. Any other question?
I have 2 questions, one for Shin, Hyun, and one for Jurgen and Letty and Fabio. For Mr. Shin, it's not clear to me whether the 3 programs you described are pilots in the sense that they are designed to be experiments that demonstrate the benefit of this kind of program, or whether they are programs that are implemented but just on a temporary basis because funding isn't certain for the future. So I'm just wondering if you can clarify that, and then maybe I'll ask questions later.
Yeah, good question. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. I already said that this paper, the pilot and project, yeah, it's not unclear in my paper, but this 3 projects can be was prepared by the local government or local community. Yeah, the first one, Cheongsan Rural Basic Income, was designed by the local government, and it's 5-year pilot. Yeah, 5-year pilot, and the farmers' allowance of Jeonbuk is not pilot; it's continuous project. Yeah, if they can get money and approved by the local council, they can continue. But it's it needs much money. So local government wanted to this kind of money should be prepared by the local government, central government. That's why the local council wanted to pay the money from the central government, like in the form of the basic income, not basic income, but it's very, very similar to basic income. Yeah, and the third one, the kind of ability self-governing pension. Yeah, it was generated by the revenue by the solar plant. Yeah, but it's indeed the collaboration of the community members and many administrative officials and politicians. Yeah, Riksan City, the mayor is my friend. I will always say to him, you know, how can you think about the kind of the implementing basic income? But he was very, very sorry. Yeah, the kind of the tax. Yeah, because the mayor was not major party's member. So if he pay the basic income to the local the resident, maybe the major party will oppose. Yeah, not popular. This time he became a governmental party in that area, but in the time he was not he was independent mayor. So that's why he designed the kind of the local community members self-governing. Only he paid the facilities for solar plant. Yeah, at that time, many central government agencies also collaborated the kind of preparing the facilities. Yeah, and the local residents, the people of the community, gave their land to solar plant. Yeah, only they all the people can get money. It's categorical.
But so that one is ongoing. It doesn't.
Yeah,
It's-
10 years will be 20 years.
Okay.
Was it funded by the income from the sale of the electricity?
Yeah. Yeah. Not tax, not money, not fund.
Okay. Can I ask the second question too? So I'm very interested in the potential for policy diffusion from this kind of emergency ramp up from an existing program. And I'm wondering, do you think it has, obviously this is a very special case, this town, you said it has a kind of a solidarity ethos to begin with. Do you think there's a possibility in kind of selling this as a way for other places that aren't as solidaristic? I'm thinking of my home country of the United States, for example, as a sort of emergency preparation, right? To have citizens sign up for something like, get into a system already in anticipation of the next hurricane or flood or pandemic or whatever it is.
Fire.
Right. So, well, two things. One, there is already policy diffusion, but locally. So there's, I think, up to 8 municipalities now in the wider region, the state basically, who are interested in looking at the Maricá model. And it's not just the renda básica. I mean, it's also the local currency thing. And then there's the complication with the oil sovereign wealth funds and things like that. So one of the interesting things, and this actually is a project that we're hoping to do a lot more work on, depending on funding. But one of the really interesting things is, as it travels, how does it change? Because all these different municipalities, they're not the same. I mean, even Maricá and Niterói are very, very different type of places, right? So, but that's local. So that's really interesting. So the next step would then be, can we transfer sort of municipal type of initiatives into other countries, for example? So one of the interesting things about Brazil is, and I'm very much learning about this, right? So I want to be very, very careful. But the one thing, having just been in Brazil a couple of weeks ago and talking to a lot of people, I mean, it's absolutely fascinating how much power municipalities have. So comparing, I mean, people were mentioning Finland before, which is a country I know quite well. I mean, municipalities in Finland don't barely do anything, so to speak, right? So they, it's the national state that does that. So policy transfer as a municipal system, so to speak, would then have to meet certain conditions, whether they exist or not. In, say, something like the US context is really, really interesting, because in the US, of course, we have a lot of municipal projects going on. But so finally, of course, then policy transfer towards beefing that up into a national type of system, I mean, that's a whole different ballgame, right? So I guess one thing we want to do is basically just show that there is the people who argue of emergency basic income as a stepping stone, they say start with emergency basic income, build from that. The interesting thing about this is we're flipping it around. But what does that then mean? Well, one, it means that in some sense, you need to have that universal basic income thing already in place. But one of the things that our paper does or tries to do is basically say there is a pandemic argument in addition to all the arguments we already have on basic income for the universal one to be put forward in cases where governments are really worried about something like pandemic preparedness, right? So a government may not care about solidarity or freedom or equality or any of these other things and still care about pandemic preparedness. And here we have an argument, right? We have an argument to say, look, you need to have the tap going so that you can, you can pull it fully open the moment you need to close down your economy or whatever, right? That's the line of argumentation.
Thank you for the great exchange. Because we have our plenary session starting at 2:30. Maybe I'm afraid we can only accept one more question. Any? Oh.
I wonder if you very briefly can explain if there are in these communities, in these areas, the public health, education, public education, public health in place, and are they similar? So it's a constant, and then to assess how these programs changes. Maybe answer now, and we can. Briefly, I wanted to ask you what are the prospects to move forward in the current situation, because it seems that you have done a lot of work, very interesting modeling, but what's going to happen with all this work? Thank you.
You mean that the education system in the local community area?
Public,
public
education, health, and housing.
Housing, yeah. Okay, yeah. The Cheongsanmyeon project is very important in our country. Yeah. Cheongsan rural basic income not sufficient. Yeah, 150 Korean won, not sufficient. Maybe, but even if it is not sufficient, they wanted to be affirmative in the economy in that area. So many people, especially the local administration agency, wanted to measure the multiplier effect in that area, a kind of circular economy. Yeah. And they wanted to get people be awareness of the kind of the system. Yeah, that's why they want to expand and spread this system to other provinces and other counties. Yeah, from the pilot, many people can be aware the kind of the pilot. Yeah. And so that's why the people want to money and demand the kind of same money from the local government. That's the problem. So that's why the kind of pilot cannot be sustainable if they cannot get secure funding. Yeah. Maybe many people taste the kind of money from the pandemic. EBI is the kind of helicopter money. Yeah, in my hometown, one mayor paid much money to the people after election. So many mayors were competitive to pay the kind of money. That's the problem. Yeah, but they know that the kind of money would be very available for the election. So that's why we can get secure, we can get money from the common good, natural resources and so on. Maybe you would be heard Sunshine Pension in Sinan County. So whole nation wanted to get accustomed to that kind of basic income, maybe well educated to get money from the government.
I'm afraid we have to close this conversation because of the plenary session awaiting for us below. But thank you so much for the great presentation, questions and answers. Although we are all coming from very different national backgrounds, let alone academic backgrounds, sharing each of our experiences, I think, in such detailed manner was not only informative, but also very empowering for me. Hope we can continue this conversation globally in the future as well. And thank you everybody for coming.
Thank you.
It was really impressive that